Good morning. Welcome to episode 74 of Tea, Coffee, and Torah. This is our Decoding the Sabbath series. We are looking at not just the weekly Sabbath, we are looking at the holy days, which are also called Sabbaths, and they are key to the covenant. In the past, we've talked about how the 10 Commandments are really 10 categories of law, and you have other laws that fall underneath those 10 primary concepts. The fourth commandment for the weekly Sabbath is the beginning, but it isn't the end of all the holy days that Jehovah gives to Israel at Mount Sinai. Now, we are probably dealing today with the most controversial of the holy days, and it's really more controversial simply because the dating seems to be ambiguous. So what I want to do today is see if we can find any clarity in this. And I actually learned something that I didn't know before from this study. I probably have studied this, 15 times, maybe 20 times over the last 25 years. But it was this study, just putting it on this chart. And if you haven't, I did repost this chart again. I think it's page 2 of that Google document. So if you have not, gone to that Google document, please go retrieve it. And it is the one, I think it's called page 2. And I think I also labeled it Shavuot. So go get that document. It is an Excel document with that chart. Because I find that, until you categorize things, they just are kind of out there in oblivion and they don't really have any context or meaning. And what I'd like to show you today is an overall synthesis that really runs through every single holy day that we see. And I am going to spend just a little bit of time in Leviticus. I'm going to begin in Leviticus. I know the scholarly consensus is seeing Leviticus as late. I do not see it as late. I see it as primary to the Mosaic period, but its purpose was really more along the cultic religious side, where you could call it the book of Hawk, or the book, the KJV translates as statutes. I have expressed before that statutes in the modern term is a very, very poor rendering of the concept, because it's not a statute of law that we think of modernly. These are simply cultic or religious regulations. But that doesn't mean they don't have meaning. They actually, as we're going to see today, they have very rich meaning as to what they commemorate, as to their purpose, and as to how they're supposed to be celebrated. So let's begin with Leviticus 23, we're going to look at verses 11 and through 15. In this text, it looks like there's two possibilities because of the ambiguity of the text. And we are going to read these this morning. The first possibility, it looks like the Sabbath day, it comes after the last Sabbath of unleavened bread, thus making the Feast of Unleavened Bread an 8th day feast. And this would really parallel what we see for Sukkot, where, it's very odd, at least it seems kind of odd, that you have Pesach going from the 15th through the 21st, and it's only 7 days, whereas Sukkot is an 8th day. We would kind of expect there to maybe be some cogency where there's always an 8th day. And in one possibility, and I'm not going to be definitive here because we're going to plot these on a calendar later on, and that calendar kind of brings the synthesis. So this is an ongoing study. This is not going to be a one-all end-all, because we are going to come back to this a couple episodes from now. But the first possibility, and this would really take the context of Leviticus 23 into consideration, because what we have, the instruction right before Shavuot is for Feast of Unleavened Bread, where it talks about the 7 days. The first day and the 7th day are holy days. And thank you, Lee, for that. I appreciate it. The first day and the 7th day are holy days. And those are the days that you sanctify. So the question is, if this maybe parallels Sukkot in some way, where's the 8th day? Well, if the wave sheaf occurs on that Sabbath or the day after that final holy day. So you have the 21st, that would then be the 22nd as the wave sheaf offering. And that would really make sense because the entire context of the text appears to be that Israel is bringing their first fruits to Jerusalem during unleavened bread. I mean, would coincide. It would give Israel the opportunity to come to the priest, to come to the temple, and to offer their wave sheaf offering the final day of Pesach. So for me personally, I kind of like that rendering. It would be the day after the Shabbat. Now, with this reckoning, it wouldn't always fall on a specific day of the week. It would just always be, 50 days after that final Shabbat, so after the 22nd, but it would still be a fixed date every year. So the second possibility, that we find is that the count begins after the feast has ended, the day after the next weekly Sabbath. If that is and this too plays a factor because depending on how it would have fallen during the Exodus, you could have had a Friday as the 21st. You could have had a Shabbat as the 22nd. And then that day after would have been Sunday. So that it would still fall in kind of the traditional rendering where it always follows on a Sunday, 50 days afterwards. So the calendar really plays, and we're going to look at some of these scenarios later on, as we go through this, but it would make the Shavuot fall on the, Sunday 50 days later. So you would have unleavened bread, then you would have, weekly Shabbat, and then you would immediately have the beginning of the count of Shavuot. And I do find that Leviticus 23 is really primary. No other place do we have such clear instructions, definitions, and timing. But let's go ahead and look at Leviticus 23. And let's look at sorry about that. My daughter called in. I use my phone for these. Okay. So we are going to verse, let me find my, okay, here we go. Leviticus 23 verse 10. Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land. And this phrase, when you come into the land, is a key giveaway to a very early text that is written during the wilderness sojourn. And you find that, there's many of these that we have. So when you come into the land, which I give to you, and you shall reap the harvest thereof, you shall bring a sheaf of your first fruits of your harvest to the priest. Now, I know that we're not going to get into this controversy today. I know I alluded to it last time regarding the beginning of the year. From all of my studies, and I did talk about this in YHWH Volume 1, the new year begins after the equinox, after the first new moon, and then you have that 14 days afterwards. What that means is that you're going to already have maybe even harvested your crops by that time because it is going to be so late in the season. Rarely does it ever begin before March 22nd. It's usually always after April 20th, or it even gets into May 10th, can be a very, very late, Pesach and unleavened bread. So when you follow that scenario, it really kind of takes away the need for an Aviv reckoning because it always falls later. But back to the material here. So you bring the first fruits of your harvest to the priest, and he shall wave it before YHWH to be accepted for you on the morrow after the Sabbath. The priest shall wave it. Now that's where the ambiguity. Where is the Sabbath that it's talking about that you're going to wave it? Is this something that's done in your hometown, or is this something that's done in Jerusalem? And we're not going to really get, am I interrupted? Let's see. Okay. Hopefully it's still there. So we're not going to get into this today, but, Shavuot is mentioned as one of the 3 holy days where you're going to come to Jerusalem to celebrate it. It's one of the 3 times a year where all your males are going to come to Jerusalem. So maybe the wave sheaf was done in Jerusalem. Maybe it was done in your hometown. But regardless, the Shavuot itself is going to be in Jerusalem. So here's the key. Everybody has to start on the same day. You can't say, okay, we're going to number 50 days and everybody comes to Jerusalem at a different time on Shavuot. No. If the 3 times a year shall your males appear before me, Shavuot is one of those times, and it's going to be a very specific date. But there's another reason why I strongly support a very specific date and reckoning to this. Let's look, we're going to jump down now to verse 15. So the first part of Shavuot is going to be bringing this wave sheaf. This is your grain. This is in the raw, freshly harvested, acknowledging Yahweh of the blessings that he has given for your grains, for the bounty that he's giving you. So you're acknowledging him as the source of your food, of your sustenance. Now we're going to skip down to 15. It says, and you shall count to the morrow after the Sabbath, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, 7 Sabbaths shall be complete. Even unto the morrow after the 7th Sabbath shall you number 50 days, and you shall offer a new meat offering unto Yahweh. Now, here's something that I have missed, because I always think, oh, it's just part of the sacrifices. But no, it says, you shall bring out of your habitations 2 wave loaves of 2/10 of a deal, and they shall be of fine flour, and they shall be baked with leaven. So here's something baked with leaven. They are the first fruits unto Yahweh. So what you're supposed to do, so the first time with the wave sheaf, you're simply bringing the raw grains. The second time, you're bringing the bread that you broke, that you baked from those raw grains. But here's the thing, you're bringing 2 loaves. Why 2 loaves? So this is where, for me, it gets really, really fun. When we run through the calendar, and again, when we do the calendar episodes, we'll see this in black and white. When you count from the day after, I believe it's the day after the weekly Sabbath. So you have Feast of Unleavened Bread. You have that weekly, you have the 21st. You have the weekly Sabbath, and then you have that Sunday. When you number 50 days and you plot all the dates that are given in Torah for Israel's sojourn till they go to Mount Sinai, it is exactly 50 days from unleavened bread to Moses receiving the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai. Israel gathers at the base of the mountain a little bit earlier, but Moses is sending up into the mountain to receive that covenant written by the hand of Yahweh for the first time is exactly 50 days. So the question is, we find that in every reference to the holy days, they usually commemorate something. Passover celebrates Israel's deliverance out of Egypt. Unleavened bread celebrates the fact that Israel was thrust out of Egypt so fast their bread didn't even have time to rise. And as well as the fact that the feast itself also commemorates this idea of the Exodus itself. We find Sukkot celebrates the fact that Israel dwelt in booths when they exited Egypt. The Sabbath day commemorates creation. Primarily, we're also going to find as we continue on that it also celebrates as a secondary factor Israel's deliverance from the house of bondage, where now they have this granted this day of rest every week where they don't have to be slaves. So then what does Shavuot commemorate? Is it just some willy-nilly holiday? And a lot of proponents will take Deuteronomy 16:9, which states, from the moment the sickle begins to hit the standing sheaves, you number 50 days. But that really is ambiguous, and it appears that it's very personal. It's very, to that community, or it's to that individual as to when you're going to number it. So then that is going to put your Shavuot as something that is always has a different date. And again, remember, Shavuot is something that is celebrated in Jerusalem. So this morrow after the Sabbath, where we take it as either the day after the 21st to make it an 8th day holiday, or we take it the day after the Sabbath following, it always is going to put a very hard date on it. And as we're going to see when we go into the calendar, it is exactly when Israel received the covenant. So what do we do on Shavuot? And this has always been, there's always, we do something for Pesach. We do something for unleavened bread. We do something for Sukkot. So what do we do for Shavuot? Well, it tells us we are going to bake 2 loaves of bread. And here's my, proposition. Those 2 loaves of bread very likely represent the 2 tablets of stone that Moses was given. So you are celebrating this giving of the Torah, the giving of the covenant at Mount Sinai when you celebrate Shavuot. So it's very rich in meaning. I also want to point out that in Leviticus 23, verse 14, this is specifically mentioned as a chok. So again, this is a cultic institution or regulation. But we also find in Exodus, let me get this verse right here. In Exodus 23, verse 16. So in Exodus 23, we also find that just like the Shabbat, it is listed among YHWH's judgments. Now, Passover and unleavened bread are not mentioned among YHWH's judgments, but the weekly Sabbath and Shavuot are listed among YHWH's judgments. So bring out that document that I have, study it. We are going to continue adding layers to this. I'm also going to point out there is no work. You are to have a holy convocation on this day. And remember, it doesn't actually call this a Sabbath, or a Shabbaton. And remember, I also proposed that the term Shabbaton could simply have been the word for Sabbath from the northern kingdom rather than from the southern kingdom, or maybe it was an ancient word. Remember how the word prophet replaced the word seer. Shabbaton could have been an ancient word where the word Shabbat calling in. We have all of these different, and I think she's calling in this morning because my daughter was in labor earlier. So, we have all of these different layers that a lot of scholars will look at critically, and they'll say, oh, this shows that, it was written very late. Well, what we have is an archaeological document where it's been updated. And if this is historical, we should expect to see older terms, just like we do in modern day English. None of us say kni anymore, but you can go to historical documents and you can trace forensically, the migration or the evolution of how English has gone from a very Germanic language to kind of in its own right to being functioning and all these other terms coming into it, or the terms itself evolving. So we do see this in the Torah. And it shows, that history, which leads, at least for me, to a great deal of authenticity. So I do find Leviticus to be very primary. And look at this document, go through it, and I have put the 2 things that we are supposed to do in connection with Shavuot on there. And I do want to bring out too that the Septuagint also kind of gives us an idea. It says the day after the first day. So this would actually put the wave sheaf the day after Pesach. So I guess perhaps this puts 3 possible dates, the 16th, the 22nd, and then maybe as late as the 18th or something like that, depending. But I do find that this is still a very limited range for when you begin the count. It's not like you're going to begin it, 2-3 weeks later after the Feast of Unleavened Bread. From all accounts, it really looks to be tied to that feast in some way, where the entire community is going to be doing the same thing at the same time. So thank you so much for joining me. I am going to try to run and see my daughter this afternoon, and I have a long drive ahead. So thank you for joining me, and please put your comments. I love seeing your input. And please, when you make a comment, put the source in there. Don't just make some ambiguous comment. Tell me where you're drawing from, because that really helps us to have a rich and rewarding discussion. Thank you so much.